The Zyron Empire was one of the most feared civilizations in the galaxy. Their leader, King Vortak, ruled with an iron fist. He believed in strength, power, and dominance. To him, weakness was unforgivable. But his only daughter, Princess Styra, was different. She was kind, gentle, and believed in peace. She hated war. She hated how her father conquered planets, destroyed civilizations, and treated others like they were nothing. For years, she tried to change him. She begged him to stop the bloodshed. But Vortak only saw her kindness as a sign of weakness. One day, he made his decision. "You are no daughter of mine," he said coldly, standing before the entire royal court. "From this day forward, you are banished. You are no longer a Zyron." Gasps filled the grand hall. The royal ministers and guards stood in shock. No one had ever seen a Zyron king disown his own blood. Zyra stood frozen, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. "Father, please, you don't have to do this," she pleaded. But Vortak raised his hand. "Enough." His voice echoed through the hall. "You are weak. You bring shame to our race. Leave now, or I will make sure you never return." Tears welled in Zyra's eyes. She had always known her father was merciless, but she never thought he would abandon her. Without another word, the guards grabbed her arms and dragged her away. She didn't fight back. There was no use. Her own father had turned his back on her. Zyra was thrown into a transport ship and sent to a distant, lifeless planet. It was a wasteland. No water, no food, just endless rocky terrain and deadly creatures lurking in the shadows. As the ship's engines roared, leaving her behind, she felt the weight of her new reality. She was alone. She sat on the cold ground, her heart pounding. The air was thin, the sky a deep shade of red. The sun barely shined, casting eerie shadows over the jagged rocks. For hours she wandered, searching for shelter. But all she found were monstrous beasts with glowing red eyes watching her from the darkness. Her stomach ached from hunger, her throat dry from thirst. She had never felt this helpless. Was this how she would die? She fell to her knees, staring at the endless sky above. Her father had abandoned her. He had left her to suffer. But as she sat there, hopeless and broken, something unexpected happened. A ship appeared in the distance. Not a Zyron ship, something else. Something human. Commander Jack Carter stood inside his warship, staring at the holographic report in front of him. "Princess Zyra, banished by her own father," he muttered. Jack had fought against the Zyron Empire many times. He knew how ruthless they were, but this was new. Why would a power-hungry king abandon his own daughter? He leaned back in his chair, thinking. Then, a small smirk formed on his lips. "This could be interesting," he said. He turned to his crew. "Prepare for landing. We're going to pick up a princess." On the barren planet, Zyra sat under a jagged rock, exhausted. Her body was weak, her vision blurred. Then she heard a sound, a deep hum, like an engine cutting through the sky. She looked up. A massive human warship hovered above her, kicking up dust and wind. Her heart pounded. Humans? Here? The ship's ramp lowered, and a tall figure stepped out. His sharp eyes scanned the area before landing on her. Jack Carter took a slow step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Looks like you could use some help, Princess." Zyra blinked at him, confused. Why would a human help her? Little did she know, this was just the beginning, not just of her survival, but of something much bigger, something that would shake the entire galaxy. Zyra stared up at the towering human, her golden eyes clouded with exhaustion and suspicion. She had been taught that humans were weak, inferior creatures, not worthy of respect. But the man standing before her didn't look weak at all. His presence alone radiated confidence, power, and something else she couldn't quite place: determination. Jack Carter extended a gloved hand toward her. "You coming or not?" She hesitated. The last time someone had offered her a choice, it was her father, and it led to her exile. Could she really trust this man? Jack sighed, lowering his hand. Suit yourself, princess. But from the looks of it, you won't last another night out here. He turned to leave, heading back toward his ship. The cold wind howled around them, lifting dust into the air. The monstrous creatures lurking in the distance inched closer, sensing weakness. Zara swallowed hard. She had no choice. She pushed herself up, her limbs aching, and took an unsteady step forward. "Wait," she called out. Jack stopped, turning back to face her. "Take me with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Good choice." He motioned to his crew, and within seconds, 2 soldiers rushed forward to help her onto the ship. As the ramp closed behind them, Syra took one last glance at the desolate wasteland. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Anything was better than dying on this forsaken rock. Inside the warship, Syra was taken to the medical bay. A robotic medic scanned her body, injecting her with nutrients and hydration packs. Slowly, color returned to her face, and her strength started to build. Jack stood by the doorway, arms crossed. "So tell me, why did the great King Vortak throw away his only heir?" Zyra's jaw clenched. "Because I refused to be like him." Jack chuckled. "A noble heart in a family of tyrants. That's a dangerous thing." She narrowed her eyes. "I don't need your pity, human." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Good, because I wasn't offering it." Zyra glared at him but said nothing. She had spent her whole life fighting against her father's rule, but now she was at the mercy of a human. "Rest up," Jack said, turning to leave. "You're not a prisoner here. But if you think you can do anything stupid, think again. This ship may not be as ruthless as your father, but we don't take kindly to threats." Zyra didn't respond. Instead, she lay back on the bed, staring at the cold metal ceiling. For the first time in her life, she had no title, no home, no power. She was no longer a princess, just an exile. But deep inside, something burned. Her father had cast her aside like she was nothing. He had thrown her away, choosing power over blood. He thought she was weak. He would regret that. Days passed, and Syra slowly adapted to life aboard the human warship. The crew was wary of her at first, whispering behind her back, fearful of her alien heritage. "She's one of them," a soldier muttered. "What if she's a spy?" "She doesn't seem dangerous," another said. "She looks lost." Zyra ignored them. She had no reason to care what these humans thought. But Jack, he was different. He didn't treat her like a prisoner. He didn't treat her like royalty, either. He treated her like a soldier. "You want to survive?" he asked one day, tossing her a weapon. "Then learn to fight like a human." She caught it instinctively, her fingers curling around the cold metal. She had trained with Zyron weapons her whole life, but this was different. Jack smirked. "Let's see what you've got, princess." For the first time since her exile, Syra felt something she hadn't in a long time. Purpose. Her father thought he had erased her from existence. He had no idea that she was just getting started. Zyra's breath came fast and heavy as she blocked Jack's strike with the combat staff he had given her. The weapon hummed with energy, its metallic surface glinting under the training room's artificial lights. Jack had been relentless, pushing her harder than any drill sergeant she had encountered back in the Zyron Royal Academy. "Again," Jack ordered, his voice sharp, his stance unwavering. Zyra gritted her teeth. She was no stranger to combat, but human fighting styles were different. They relied less on brute force and more on tactical precision. Zyron warriors were trained to dominate through sheer strength, but Jack fought like a predator, waiting for the perfect opening, striking with deadly efficiency. She lunged forward, feinting a high strike before sweeping low. Jack dodged effortlessly, sidestepping her attack with a smirk. "Too predictable," he taunted. Zyra growled in frustration. She was the daughter of King Vortak, trained in galactic warfare since birth. Why was she struggling against a mere human? Jack attacked without warning. His staff slammed into her side, sending her stumbling backward. The pain flared, but she refused to fall. "You're relying too much on brute force," Jack said. "That works against lesser opponents, but against someone who thinks, someone who adapts, you'll lose every time." Zaira clenched her fists. "You think I can't adapt?" Jack shrugged. "Prove me wrong." She exhaled slowly, resetting her stance. This time, she didn't charge in recklessly. She watched him carefully, noting the slight shifts in his posture, the micro movements before he attacked. Jack swung again, but she was ready. She ducked, twisting to the side, and bringing her staff up in a sharp counterstrike. Jack barely had time to block. "Better," he admitted, pushing back with renewed force. They fought for what felt like hours, their movements a blur of strikes and counters. By the time Jack finally called the session to an end, Zaira was drenched in sweat, but she stood taller than before. Jack nodded approvingly. "You're learning." For the first time, Zaira felt something unfamiliar, not just pride, but respect. Not for Jack, but for herself. Later that night, Zaira sat alone in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the polished metal wall. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Gone was the pristine princess who had once worn royal Zyran armor. In her place stood a warrior in training, scared, bruised, but still standing. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called. Jack stepped inside, his usual confident expression replaced by something more serious. He tossed a small data pad onto her bed. "Thought you might want to see this." Zaira picked it up, her golden eyes scanning the screen. The data made her blood run cold. It was a transmission from her father's fleet. King Vortak was preparing for war. Not just any war, a campaign to wipe out humanity. Her hands tightened around the device. So this was his plan. He had cast her aside like garbage, but he was still willing to annihilate an entire species just to maintain his grip on power. Jack folded his arms. "I assume you knew something like this was coming." Zaira's jaw clenched. "No, I knew my father was ruthless, but I didn't think he'd be this reckless." Jack studied her carefully. "Then you also know that if he succeeds, your exile won't matter. There won't be a galaxy left for you to return to." A tense silence stretched between them. Finally, Zaira stood, her shoulders squared. "Then we stop him." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Just like that." She met his gaze with steel in her eyes. "I may not be his daughter anymore, but I am still Zyran, and I do not stand by while tyrants destroy innocent lives." Jack smirked. "Now you're talking like a soldier." She didn't smile back. There was no joy in this mission, only necessity. For years, she had fought against her father's rule in secret, hoping to change his mind. But now she would tear down everything he built. The silence in the war room was suffocating. Dim blue holograms flickered above the steel table, displaying an ominous sight: King Vortak's fleet, a monstrous force of dreadnoughts and destroyers, moving like a shadow across the galaxy. Their destination was unmistakable: Earth. Zaira's fingers curled into fists as she stared at the display. Every ship in that fleet represented thousands of Zyran warriors, each loyal to the throne, each ready to obliterate anything in their path. Jack leaned against the table, his usual smirk replaced with a grim expression. "Well, I'll give your father this. He doesn't do things halfway." Zaira barely heard him. Her mind raced with calculations, scenarios, plans, all of them ending in disaster. The Zyran Empire didn't fight wars. It ended them. Jack's voice snapped her back to the present. "We need a strategy." She exhaled slowly. "Attacking head-on is suicide. His fleet is too powerful." "Then we don't fight head-on," Jack said, tapping the screen. "We hit them where they least expect it." Zaira's golden eyes flicked to him. "Sabotage." Jack grinned. Now you're thinking like a human. A new tension settled over the room, heavy with unspoken truths. This was no longer just about revenge. This was about survival. The plan came together quickly. Too quickly. Zaira hated how much was left to chance, but they had no time for perfection. The goal was simple: cripple Vortak's fleet before they reached Earth. The means? Infiltration. Zaira knew the Zyron command structure. She knew their weaknesses. The central warship, the Oblivion, was the key. It was the heart of the fleet, the ship that housed Vortak himself. If they could get aboard and disable its core systems, they could turn the tide before the battle even began. Simple in theory, deadly in execution. The stolen Zyron transport shuddered as it exited hyperspace, slipping unnoticed into the chaos of the fleet's movement. Jack piloted with expert precision, keeping them just inside the blind spot of the Oblivion scanners. Every second they remained unseen was a miracle. Zaira strapped on her stolen Zyron battle armor. It had been months since she'd worn the cold black plating of her people, and the weight of it felt both familiar and foreign. Jack whistled. "You almost look like one of them." Zaira shot him a sharp glance. "I am one of them." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" The question lingered in the air between them as the docking sequence initiated. They moved fast. Security was tight, but Zaira was still royalty in the system's eyes. Her clearance codes worked, allowing them to slip past the automated defenses with ease. The real challenge lay ahead. They had minutes, not hours. The control room was eerily quiet. Zyron engineers worked at their stations, oblivious to the two intruders lurking in the shadows. Jack crouched beside Zaira, whispering, "You're sure this will work?" She nodded, eyes locked onto the central power grid console. "Once I overload the core, the ship will go into emergency lockdown. It'll disable weapons, shields, and comms." Jack smirked. "And give Earth a fighting chance." Zaira didn't answer. She was already moving. With practiced ease, she accessed the terminal, fingers flying over the alien controls. Alarms would sound soon, but by then, it would be too late. A sharp beep confirmed the override sequence. Jack grinned. "That's my cue." He moved swiftly, planting explosive charges along the room's structural points. One well-placed detonation would cripple the Oblivion systems permanently. Everything was going perfectly. Until the door slammed open. Zyron guards flooded the room, weapons drawn, and standing at the center of them, King Vortak himself. Zaira's breath caught in her throat. Her father's golden armor gleamed under the cold lights, his face unreadable. The moment stretched, unspoken words filling the space between them. Then his voice came, low and full of dangerous calm. "You should have died in exile." Zaira's fingers tightened around her weapon. "You should have been a father." Vortak's expression didn't change. "You are no daughter of mine." Pain lanced through her chest, but she refused to show it. "Good, because I came here as your enemy." Vortak's eyes darkened. "Then you will die like one." The guards opened fire. Zaira barely had time to react. Blue plasma bolts tore through the control room, scorching the metal walls as she and Jack dived for cover. Jack cursed under his breath. "I hate it when plans go sideways." Zaira's heart pounded. She had known this moment would come, but she had never expected to face her father so soon. King Vortak stood tall, his golden armor gleaming under the control room's flickering lights. He did not flinch, did not move. He merely watched as his soldiers did his bidding, as if he was already certain of the outcome. Zaira refused to let him win. She peeked over the edge of the console, firing a precise shot that took down one of the guards. Jack followed her lead, tossing a detonation charge toward the bulkhead doors. Boom! The explosion sent shockwaves through the room, forcing Vortak's soldiers to stumble. That was their chance. "Move!" Zaira shouted, darting toward the nearest exit. Jack was right behind her. "Where are we going?" "To finish what we started." The corridors of the Oblivion were chaos. Alarms blared, red warning lights flashing overhead. The once immaculate flagship of the Zyron Empire was now in disarray. Zyra led the way, her mind racing. The plan had been to disable the warship and escape unnoticed. That was no longer an option. Now, they had to destroy it. Jack jogged beside her. "Tell me we've got a backup plan." "We do," Axira said grimly. "We take out the ship's reactor core." Jack blinked. "That's not a plan. That's a death wish. It's the only way to stop my father." Jack exhaled sharply but didn't argue. "All right, lead the way." The reactor chamber was heavily guarded. Dozens of Zyron elites stood in formation, weapons drawn, blocking the entrance. Zyra's grip tightened around her blaster. "This will be difficult." Jack smirked. "Difficult? Nah, just impossible." She glanced at him. "You don't have to stay." Jack rolled his eyes. "And miss all the fun?" "Not a chance." She couldn't help but smile, just for a second. Then, without hesitation, she charged forward. The battle was brutal. Zyra fought with everything she had, weaving between enemy fire, using her Zyron combat training to her advantage. Jack covered her from behind, his quick reflexes keeping them both alive. One by one, the guards fell. But Zyra knew the real fight was just beginning. The reactor core pulsed with raw energy, filling the room with an eerie blue glow. This was the heart of the ship, the key to its destruction. She ran to the control panel and began inputting the sequence. "I'm overloading the core. We have 3 minutes to get out." Jack groaned. "I hate countdowns." Then a cold voice filled the chamber. "You are making a grave mistake." Zyra turned. Vortak had arrived. He stood alone, his golden eyes burning with unforgiving rage. He took slow, measured steps forward, the floor beneath him humming with power. Jack raised his blaster, but Vortak barely glanced at him. "This is a family matter, human. Leave, and I may spare your life." Jack didn't lower his weapon. "Yeah, that's not gonna happen." Vortak's gaze returned to Axira. "I gave you life. I gave you strength. And yet you betray your own kind for this primitive species." Zyra stepped forward. "You abandoned me. You were weak," Vortak said, his voice cold. "A disgrace to the Zyron bloodline." Zyra's hands shook with fury. "No, I was just not the daughter you wanted. But I am strong now, and I will end this war, even if it means destroying you." Vortak's eyes darkened. "Then you leave me no choice." He lunged. Zyra barely had time to react as Vortak's blade ignited, a weapon forged from pure plasma, designed to cut through anything. She dodged just in time, rolling across the floor as the blade sliced through metal like paper. Jack fired at Vortak, but the Zyron King moved like a phantom, dodging each shot effortlessly. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he sent a shockwave through the air, slamming Jack against the wall. Zyra's breath caught. "Jack." Jack groaned but didn't move. Her fury boiled over. With a battle cry, Zyra charged her father. Their weapons clashed, energy sparking between them. Each strike was met with equal force, their skills matched. But Vortak had decades of experience, and his strength was overwhelming. "You cannot win," Vortak said, forcing her back. "You are still that weak, foolish girl." Zyra gritted her teeth. "Not anymore." She ducked beneath his next strike, and with all her strength, plunged her blade into his side. Vortak staggered. For the first time, Zyra saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Shock. He looked down at the wound, then back at her. "You would kill your own father." Zyra's heart pounded. She wanted to say something, to explain, but there was no time. The reactor was seconds from overloading. She turned away. "Goodbye, father." Then she grabbed Jack, and they ran. Behind them, Kane Vortak fell to his knees, and the ship began to explode. The Oblivion burned. Zyra and Jack barely made it to the last escape pod as the reactor core collapsed in on itself, sending shockwaves through the massive warship. The sound of metal groaning, twisting, shattering filled the air as the once mighty flagship of the Zyran Empire was reduced to flaming debris. The escape pod systems blared alarms, warning of the unstable trajectory. Zyra slammed the controls, adjusting their course as Jack groaned beside her, clutching his injured side. "You okay?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. Jack gave her a lopsided grin, though pain was evident in his eyes. "Never better. Just love crash landings." Zyra sighed, gripping the controls tighter as they hurtled toward the nearest planet. Behind them, the Oblivion detonated. A fiery explosion erupted in space, shockwaves rippling outward. It was over. The warship was gone. But Zyra knew this was far from the end. Her father was not a man who accepted defeat easily. If he was still alive, and she knew he would come for her, and he would not be alone. The escape pod crashed into the thick jungles of Corveth 7, a hostile, uncharted world on the edges of Zyran-controlled space. The impact was brutal. The pod skidded across the ground, tearing through trees and leaving a trail of scorched earth in its wake. Then, silence. Zyra groaned as she pried herself free from her seat, shaking off the dizziness. The pod's emergency lights flickered weakly. Jack coughed beside her, rubbing his bruised ribs. "Next time, I vote for a landing that doesn't involve near death." Zyra chuckled despite herself. "Noted." She pushed open the hatch, and the scent of damp earth and alien flora filled her lungs. The jungle was alive with strange sounds, distant growls, rustling leaves, unseen predators lurking. Jack climbed out beside her. "Where are we?" "Corveth 7, she said. "It's not Zyran territory, but it's dangerous. We need to move before something finds us." Jack glanced back at the wreckage. "And what about them?" Zyra followed his gaze. Flaming debris from the Oblivion's destruction rained down in the distance. It wouldn't be long before scavengers, or worse, Zyran soldiers, came looking for survivors. "We need to find shelter," she said. "Then we figure out what's next." Jack nodded, and together they plunged into the dense jungle. The forest was a nightmare. Strange creatures slithered through the shadows, their glowing eyes tracking their every move. The air was thick with moisture and the scent of decay. Jack wiped sweat from his brow. "Remind me again why we didn't just crash somewhere nice. Like a beach." Zyra smirked. "Wouldn't be an adventure then, would it?" Before he could respond, a deep guttural roar echoed through the jungle. The ground shook. Zyra froze. Jack swallowed. That didn't sound friendly. Then something massive emerged from the darkness. A Tarkov beast, a towering predator with razor-sharp mandibles, armored hide, and blood-red eyes. Jack cursed. "Okay, that is very much not friendly." The beast charged. Zyra barely had time to push Jack aside before the creature lunged, slashing at them with its massive claws. She rolled, drew her blaster, and fired. The shot bounced harmlessly off the beast's thick armor. Jack scrambled for cover. "Great, it's bulletproof. That's just perfect." The beast roared again, swiping at Zyra. She ducked, but its claws grazed her arm, slicing through her suit. Pain seared through her, but she gritted her teeth. "Jack, we need a plan." Jack scanned the area. His eyes landed on a cluster of unstable rock formations. "Over there," he shouted. "If we can get it to charge, we can bring that down on it." Zyra nodded, dodging another attack. "I'll bait it. You do the rest." Jack hesitated. "Zyra." No time to argue. Before he could stop her, she ran straight toward the beast. It roared in fury, locking onto her. She fired a few more useless shots, taunting it. "Come on, ugly. Is that all you've got?" The Tarkov beast let out a deafening shriek and charge. Zyra waited until the last second, then dove aside. The creature slammed into the rock formation. Jack, already in position, fired his blaster at the weakened structure. The rocks gave way, crashing down onto the beast. A final, echoing roar rang out. Then silence. Sarah coughed, pushing herself up. Did we get it? Jack peeked over the rubble. If it's not dead, it's having a really bad day. She sighed in relief, then winced as she touched her injured arm. Jack noticed. You okay? I'll survive. He exhaled. Well, that's one problem down. Now let's hope we don't run into any more monsters. But as they turned to leave, a new sound filled the jungle. A mechanized hum. A sound Zyra knew too well. Jack tensed. That doesn't sound like wildlife. Zyra's eyes darkened. No, that's a Zyran dropship. Jack's expression turned grim. They found us. Sarah clenched her fists. Then we make sure they regret it. The Zyran dropship hovered above the jungle canopy, its engines humming like an ominous storm. Zyra and Jack barely had time to catch their breath before the sky split open with beams of crimson light. Zyran soldiers, heavily armed and armored, descending from the dropship like a swarm of ironclad wasps. Zyra cursed under her breath, grabbing Jack's arm and pulling him deeper into the jungle. Run. Jack didn't need to be told twice. The ground erupted behind them as plasma bolts tore through the foliage, scorching trees and sending dirt flying. They're not holding back, Jack shouted, diving behind a fallen log. Zyra crouched beside him, her mind racing. They want me alive, but they'll kill you without hesitation. Jack gave her a dry look. Great, that makes me feel so much better. Zyra peeked over the log. The soldiers were fanning out, their visors glowing red in the dim light. They moved like a well-oiled machine. Zyran elites, the best of the best. And leading them was him. Zyra's stomach twisted. Standing tall in gleaming obsidian armor, King Vorton, her father, emerged from the dropship, his presence suffocating the air itself. His piercing silver eyes locked onto Xura's position. Zyra. His voice boomed, echoing through the jungle like a death knell. Come forward. End this foolishness. Zyra's fingers tightened around her blaster. She had spent years dreaming of this moment, imagining the rage she would feel when she finally faced him again. But now that he was here, standing just meters away, something colder than rage took hold. Resolve. Jack nudged her. But do we have a plan? Because I'm getting a last stand kind of vibe, and I'd rather not die today. Zyra exhaled sharply. We're not dying. We just need to be smart. Jack glanced at the dozen heavily armed Zyran soldiers closing in. Smart how? Zyra tapped the communication module on her wrist. A small flickering light blinked. Her emergency distress beacon. Jack's eyebrows shot up. Wait, you think someone's actually coming for us? Zyra smirked. Not someone. Him. Jack didn't have time to ask who, because at that moment, chaos erupted. A deafening sonic boom cracked through the air as something massive pierced through the sky, streaking toward them like a meteor. The Zyran soldiers barely had time to react before the object crashed into the jungle, sending a shockwave that knocked them off their feet. Zyra and Jack shielded themselves from the debris. When the dust settled, a sleek, black combat ship stood in the clearing, its hull scorched from atmospheric re-entry. The ship's side hatch hissed open, and he stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in battle-worn exo-armor, Commander Raylan Thorne was a legend among the human resistance, a ghost, a nightmare, a warrior who had torn through Zyran forces like a storm. He cracked his neck, rolling his shoulders. Took me a while to track you down, Princess. Try not to get into trouble next time. Zyra grinned. No promises. Vorton's expression darkened. You dare interfere, human. Ryland smirked, pulling a plasma rifle from his back. I'm not interfering. I'm finishing what she started. And then, all hell broke loose. The jungle exploded with gunfire and plasma bursts as Rylan launched himself into battle. He moved like a force of nature, cutting through Zyran soldiers with ruthless efficiency. Jack grabbed a blaster from a fallen enemy and joined the fight, ducking behind cover and taking shots where he could. Zyra, however, had only one target: her father. She sprinted toward him, dodging plasma fire, leaping over fallen logs, closing the distance. Vorton saw her coming and didn't move. He simply raised a hand, palm glowing with energy. Zyra barely had time to react before an invisible force slammed into her, sending her flying backward. She crashed into the dirt, coughing as pain lanced through her body. Vorton approached, his expression unreadable. "You are still weak, daughter." Zyra pushed herself up, her arms trembling. But she did not falter. "And you are still a coward." Vorton's eyes flashed with fury. "Watch your tongue." She wiped blood from her lip and grinned. "Or what? You'll disown me again." Vorton raised his hand, energy crackling at his fingertips. "I should have ended you when I had the chance." Zyra's heart pounded. Then, a deafening explosion. The ground shook violently as Rylan's ship unleashed a barrage of missiles, obliterating the Zyran reinforcements. Vorton stumbled back, momentarily distracted, and Zyra took her chance. She lunged forward, tackling him with everything she had. They crashed to the ground, rolling through the dirt, fists flying. Vorton was stronger, but Zyra was faster. She dodged his strikes, landing a powerful blow to his jaw. He growled, grabbing her by the throat, lifting her off the ground. "Enough," he snarled. Zyra struggled, gasping for air, but then she saw it. The look in his eyes. It wasn't just rage, it was fear. Fear that she was no longer the weak girl he had abandoned. Fear that she was winning. A surge of adrenaline hit her, and she kicked him square in the chest. Vorton stumbled, releasing her. She hit the ground, rolled, and grabbed his own plasma blade from his belt. By the time he looked up, she had the blade at his throat. Silence fell. The jungle burned around them. The last of the Zyran soldiers lay motionless. Rylan stood nearby, Jack at his side, weapons still raised. Vorton stared at his daughter, genuine shock flickering across his face. "You wouldn't," he sneered. Zyra's hand trembled. She could end this. Right now, she could finally be free. But then she thought of Jack, of Rylan, of what it meant to be human, not just to survive, but to be better than the monsters they fought. She exhaled and lowered the blade. "You're not worth it," she said coldly. Vorton's expression twisted with fury, but before he could react, Rylan stepped forward and punched him across the face. Vorton collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Jack let out a breath. Well, that was satisfying. Zyra stood over her father's fallen form, then turned to Rylan. "Let's get out of here." Rylan nodded, already heading toward the ship. "Dan right." Jack smirked. "You know, for a simple rescue mission, that was way too intense." Zyra chuckled, shaking her head as they boarded the ship. The ramp closed behind them. The engines roared to life, and as they blasted off into the sky, leaving Zyran space far behind. Ira knew. Her father had lost everything, and this time he would regret it.